So good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of ISD, CSTEP, and Knowledge SRL, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this discussion today. I am Sunil Mani, and I work as a policy advisor at ISD. And we're really glad to have you all here for this report launch webinar, which is called From Fossil Foundations to Firm Futures. And maybe just to build a little bit of context about today's discussion. Um, it is part of our ongoing budgeting for net zero initiative, BNZ or BNZ initiative, which is a multi-year project. And in this project, we've been trying to answer a simple but fundamental question. The question is India's current public financial support enough to help clean energy technologies scale up? Or is there a need for some additional public financial support? And also, if there is a need for additional public financial support, how should that support look like? So that's the budgeting for net zero or BNZ project in brief. And ISC started this project almost 3 years ago in partnership with CSTEP and KnowlEdge Srl. And in the first 2 years of this project, we looked at 5 major clean energy technologies, which included solar PV, batteries, electric vehicles, offshore wind, and green hydrogen. And for each of these 5 technologies, we assessed whether there is a cost gap between these technologies and their fossil-based alternatives in India, and whether any form of public financial support is needed to help bridge that gap. And the report, based on 2 years of work on these 5 technologies, was published last year in December. And I'm sure many of you would have also seen that one. And 2025 was the third year of this project. And this year we shifted our focus to something that's relatively new, but might become increasingly important, which is the FDRE, or the Firm and Dispatchable Renewable Energy. And today we will be releasing another report based on the analysis that we carried out on FDRE in the last 1 year. And the reason why we focus on FDRE this year is because India's electricity demand has been rising rapidly, and the question is no longer about whether India needs more clean power, but it's more around how to deliver that clean power reliably and at an affordable cost. And India has made remarkable progress in scaling solar and wind, and these technologies are now cheaper than coal-based power. But we also know that these are variable in nature. So the challenge is not about adding more megawatts of standalone solar or wind, but also ensuring that clean energy is available when it is needed. And that's where FDRE comes in, which combines solar, wind, and storage solutions to deliver RE power that is not just clean, but firm and dispatchable. And I also want to be very clear at the outset that we are not saying that FDR is the only path to firm power. It is one of the several emerging approaches, and ensuring reliable power, clean power in India will certainly require a portfolio of solutions. So we're not arguing that FDRE should automatically become the dominant model. Our objective is to simply understand FDRE as one option to deliver firm power, evaluate its potential, and assess its cost trajectory, and also explore policy choices that can help India meet its rising electricity demand without locking into long-term inflexible fossil fuel infrastructure. Talking about the structure of today's event, we were supposed to start with a keynote address from Shri JVN Subramaniam Sir, who is the Joint Secretary at the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. But I think Sir got some urgent work from the Parliament side. So maybe I think we'll start with a special address by Shri Alok Kumar Sir first, who is the Director General at the All India Discoms Association, and is also the Secretary, Ministry of Power. Post that, if Shri JVN Subramanian Sir is able to join us, then we'll have a keynote address from him. Otherwise, we'll have a 10-minute presentation from Dr. Anusuya Gangopadhyay, who is the lead author of this report from C-STEP's side. And in this presentation, she'll walk us through some of the key findings and results and insights from our FDRE report. And finally, we'll move to a moderated panel discussion led by Tara Lan, who is currently the lead for incentivizing renewable energy at IST. And this panel discussion will do a deep dive on various ways for India to achieve firm power. And before we begin, some housekeeping rules. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch later on IST's YouTube channel as well. So feel free to share it with your colleagues later on who may not be able to join it live. And if you have questions during the presentation or panel discussion, please type them in the chat at any time. We'll do our best to address them as and when possible. And we also have a few journalists on this call, requesting you as well to drop your questions in the Q&A. Finally, since we only have 75 minutes for this entire discussion, in case we are unable to respond to our questions on the chat or in person, we'll reach out to you individually over email and we can have a detailed discussion offline as well. With that, it's my privilege to invite Shri Alok Kumar sir to deliver the special address. And before that, just a quick introduction of Shri Alok Kumar sir. Sir has over 35 years of leadership experience in India's electricity and energy transition landscape, including serving as secretary to the Government of India, and he has played a central role in shaping national policies on power sector reform, renewable energy, and grid reliability. And he also chaired the G20 Energy Transitions Working Group in 2022-2023. Sir is currently a professor of practice in the Department of Hydro and Renewable Energy at IIT Roorkee and leads a Niti Aayog interministerial working group on India's net zero pathway. And in addition to that, he also serves as an independent director on the board of Power Exchange India Limited and is a partner at the Lantau Group. So with that, sir, I would like to request you to please
Yeah.
share a few words with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Once again, thanks to IISD and the other partners for inviting me to this webinar on very relevant and interesting topic. Let me begin with India's electricity sector, the way it has evolved over last more than 100 years. Very briefly, we have been successful in three major areas. First, achieving near universal access to electricity for our households, having overcome the shortages, which are very severe, and having been able to build the very robust national transmission grid. So this is the foundation on which we are now trying to move forward. What India faces is a continuously growing demand of electricity, not only because of the higher demand from households and our industries and commercial establishments, but also because of a conscious policy direction to have more electrification of energy consumption in order to facilitate energy transition. So India's power sector will will see continuously very robust growth in demand on account of these factors. Our challenge is to meet this demand in a manner which is reliable, sustainable, and affordable. So the current scenario is that India has been able to add very impressive, say, renewable energy capacities in the last 5 to 10 years. It has been recognized globally. And we have a strong, healthy pipeline. But there are two big challenges emerging on this frontier. First is we have sufficient pipeline of the renewable energy projects which have been awarded by the central agencies, but distribution companies are not coming forward to sign the PPAs. And despite of all the problems on transmission fronts, there are more than 30 gigawatt of projects which have transmission connectivity and which are facing cancellation of connectivity because of non-signing of PPAs. Second concern which is persisting and is a very valid concern is the financial viability of the distribution companies. We all know the problems of regulatory assets, the gap between the average cost of supply and average revenue realized, and the accumulated debt of distribution companies. Though there has been an improvement in the operational efficiency of our distribution companies, and the ACS ARR gap has also come down. In this context, we have a tough task to set up a policy and regulatory regime which can lead to least cost RE integration for moving forward to India's goal of net zero by 2070, meeting India's demand, at the same time keeping the cost of delivered power in check. You all know raising electricity tariff is a politically sensitive subject, and it is very difficult to keep on raising tariffs. So there is an important action required to find out the ways and means to see that while we integrate larger share of renewable energy in our power supply mix, the ultimate cost of delivered power remains within check. So there are some few areas which I will list out, then I'll come to the issue of FDRE. Most important is the rationalization of incentives for RE. Mr. Mani was talking of a public support for FDRE. I don't know to what extent it will be possible, because India is facing difficulties even continuing the support which we have been providing to RE in terms of waiver of transmission charges and a liberal DSM regime for solar and wind. Waiver of transmission charges have been phased out to a large extent, and CRC has already floated a paper for tightening of the DSM regime. The second big area of action is the assessment and control of the firming up cost of RE. We always talk of levelized cost of energy, but there's a need to talk of system costs, because there is a hidden firming cost of RE, which broad estimates are close to 2 rupees per unit. Third important area for managing this demand in a least cost manner is the robust demand forecasting by utilities in medium to long term, so that their resource adequacy plans are realistic and they don't lead to either the shortage of electricity or huge standard costs. We also have a scenario of now wider application of distributed renewable energy resources and electric vehicles and many other such developments, which necessitate the management of data which is being churned out of the smart meters and its proper utilization by the distribution companies. Last area which is relevant for this conference, this webinar, is the reforms in the electricity markets in India. Our short-term spot markets have been functioning for almost now more than 18 years, but they show a different type of symptoms. During the day hours, there is surplus of supply, the grid operator is curtailing the renewable energy, and prices are dropping down to near zero. And in many days of the year, in the evening peak, there is shortage of power in the short-term market. So we have a paradox of huge standard costs with the distribution companies, whereas lack of liquidity in the market. We all know the best mechanism is market-driven mechanism to the optimized cost of scheduling the power stations we have in our power system. Whereas investors have been depending very heavily on the long-term PPAs, but In view of the reluctance from the distribution companies in signing the 25 years must-run rigid PPAs for renewable energy, there is a need to rethink in what manner should we move forward. In that context, I will say FDRE is an instrument which is definitely an improvement over the PPAs for plain solar and plain wind generation. However, FDREs with the present format of 25 years PPA, they pose risk both for the investors in terms of sizing and the generation profiles and the market prices for disposing the surplus power, as well as for the distribution companies. In my view, FDRE is a very appropriate instrument for C&I consumers because they can be assured that they can meet their demand through green energy in a predictable manner. So FDRE will have a role which is somewhat limited role, mostly for C&I consumers. But for distribution companies, they might try the FDREs. There are issues of the effectiveness of the penalties on FDRE contracts. Distribution companies are taking the whole of the demand risk. Once a contract is signed, FDRE contract, developer, of course, has to manage on his side. But distribution company faces demand risk. If demand is not there, the distribution company will end up paying 3.5 rupee or 4 rupees per unit, whereas the same electricity is being available in the market for 20 paisa, 50 paisa, or 1 rupee. So there's a cost of reliability. So in my view, the FDRE contracts need to be promoted, but I don't think there will be a case for the public support for FDRE contracts. Public support will be more appropriately required and will be suitable for new innovative market instruments like contract for difference. This contract for difference, it allocates the risks to both generators as well as the off-takers through market-driven mechanism. So I will say, let us work for FDRE and fine-tune them. It is good that ISD and their partners have done this study. We'll be looking forward to their recommendations. But the time has come to look for, in addition, the other market-based instruments for bringing up new additional renewable energy capacity, like the contract for difference. That is all I wanted to say on this occasion. Once again, let me thank the organizers for inviting me. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective so clearly, sir, especially around the importance of robust demand forecasting so that DISCOMs resource adequacy plans are realistic, which can then help them in improving the effectiveness and efficiency of their procurement plan. And also your points around the need to rethink the procurement plan, especially around the 25-year PPA arrangement and the cost of reliability are very valid. We will try and incorporate some of these suggestions perhaps in the next round as part of next round of work as part of this project. Thank you so much for your words, sir. So
Thank you.
keeping
Thanks a
yeah,
lot. Thank you.
thank you, sir. So keeping that momentum going, we now move to our keynote address. And for that, it is my privilege to invite Shri JBN Subramaniam, sir, who is the Joint Secretary at MNRE. Sir has been deeply involved in shaping India's renewable energy journey. He is an experienced public administrator with a demonstrated history of working in the various forms of government and industry, trained in industry and investment promotion, crisis management, budgeting, analytical skills, government and emergency management. Sir is a strong civil services professional with a Chevening Gurukul Fellowship to his credit, focused on leadership and excellence from King's College, London. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I'm very happy to be part of this August gathering, the roundtable being organized by ISD and C-STEP on the very important topic of creating firm futures on the India's path to reliable clean energy. In fact, uh, this is one which has been pricking all of us for the last few months as to how do we uh, move out of the energy trilemma that the renewables generally are, especially the variable renewables are having. So, Ms. Shruti Sharma, head of ISD, Sunil Mani ji, policy advisor ISD, Alok Kumar sir, who was the DG, All India Discom Association, who just spoke before me, and all the participants who are there as a part of this roundtable. Um, a very good morning to all of you, or good afternoon to all of you. So, as you know, India has made remarkable progress in the renewable energy journey, especially the journey on solar. In the This year has been one of the best years for RE and solar in the country. We added close to till now in the in the first two halves of the financial year, we could add close to 31 gigawatts of RE, which is almost like the highest ever added, with 24 gigawatts coming from solar alone. And as you know, very recently, as a country, we have crossed the 500 gigawatts of installed capacity as a whole, and 51% of the installed capacity comes from non-fossil sources. So, this as a country, we could achieve in the last few years, keeping and balancing both the demand and the supply sides intact. So, as far as the supply sides are concerned, with the Atmanirbhar or the self-sufficiency protocol in place for the India's manufacturing story, especially the RE manufacturing and the solar manufacturing, we have crossed 100 gigawatts of solar module manufacturing capacity in the last 2 months. So over the last 4 years, this is one journey we are all very proud of in terms of where we were and where we could reach. So, in fact, the entire value chain of solar cells, the wafer ingot manufacturing, and the overall components manufacturing is something which we are looking at strengthening with our policies in the days ahead. And the 500 gigawatts of non-fossil target, which is there by 2030, which we set for the country, we are very well entrenched to be there. So when we're talking about the 51% of the installed capacity now, this is all part of that success story. Having said what I have mentioned, of course, the journey ahead is definitely having challenges. One, because with the more amount of variable energy getting induced into the grid, so the grid would have integration challenges. There are integration challenges which countries across the globe, when they were at the stage, at the position that we were, that we are today on RE, have faced. In fact, a few days ago, where we had a delegation from Australia, especially the South Australia, which is where we had a wonderful discussion on how the solar integration, especially the rooftop integration in the country, has been progressing, and the kind of challenges. I see pretty much we at the same level currently in terms of the RE integration challenges. See, there are only three questions probably once we answer, whether it is FDRE or any other strategy that we would follow, we would find answers for. As my previous speaker was aptly mentioning, renewable energy is not just the cost of generation. And especially the variable renewable energy is not just, we cannot definitely look at it only as a cost of generation. I would look at it as a cost of generation plus a cost of transmission and a cost of reliability. So these are the costs that we would automatically consider, because as far as the uptake of the entire renewable energy contracts is concerned, almost if we take it today, out of the 130 gigawatts of solar installed capacity, close to about 35 gigawatts 35 to 38 gigawatts comes from the CNI, and the rest is all the discom consumers who are discoms who are consuming the power, either in the form of distributed renewables or in the form of utility scale renewables. So when we are talking about such a huge scale of RE at the discom level, there would be questions which would be raised on the whether the power that we are procuring, is it affordable in the long run, whether it is reliable and acceptable, and whether it is available on call. So basically, whether it will provide me the energy security. Now, if you see, the energy demand for the country has been growing. Just to keep things in perspective, we are close to almost 1600, almost 1700 BUs of energy consumption happened in 2024. Now, moving forward to 2030, CA projections talk about somewhere close to 2400 BUs, and then almost 2670 to 2700 BUs for 2032. So if you are wanting to grow, if the demand projections are at that level, the country is growing at almost, we have recently clocked an 8.2 in the last quarter. But if you take an average growth rate of about 6%, our demand projections are also going at the level of 6%. So which means that uh, the overall RE story is very much intact and very much promising moving forward. The only thing is, we have to get these challenges of reliability and availability and acceptability to the discoms. These are the challenges that we probably need to resolve. Now, I would definitely see FDRE as one very important component as far as the firm power is concerned and the acceptable power is concerned. But of course, it has a cost component to it. I see that in the last few years, the REA bids on FDREs have been growing. I think you would have a panel discussion later in the day when Seki would be presenting their statistics. But overall, what I see is that out of the 69 odd gigawatts of LOAs that were entered, close to about 16.5 gigawatts had come from FDRE bids. And these bids have come somewhere in the range of 4.25 rupee to about 6.75 rupee. So there is a broad range depending upon the capacity utilization factor and the kind of standby that we are asked to do. So what I would see moving forward, two things. If at all this entire story of FDRE needs to succeed, and where it should become comparable with coal. Now, already, if I see the lower end of the bids that have been discovered, 4.25 to 6.75, so the average somewhere around the 5.5 is very well close to the average, is definitely lesser than the non-pit head coal. But when you compare with the pit head coal and add a transmission onto it, probably there is some amount of work that needs to be done moving forward. For that, couple of things definitely needs to take place. One is the storage, the VGF on the BESS that the Ministry of Power is working on. In fact, the storage bids have started moving in a big way. The plain solar and the plain wind bids have come down drastically, because the appetite at the discom level has been less for the plain solar. I wouldn't say that very much for the plain wind bids, because definitely wind has some amount of evening peak which it can cover. But solar, since it only covers the solar hours, so the plain solar beds, because obviously there is excess generation which is happening during the solar hours, so the appetite for the plain solar beds have definitely come down. But at the same time, it also throws up a big opportunity because the charging power for the BESS that is required, the standalone BESS can actually come from these excess capacities. So the storage beds and the VGF standalone VGF beds schemes that MOP has floated is giving a great impetus to the storage linked beds than the plain vanilla beds. But having said this, I would say that the ancillary services which needs to be developed in a big way also requires storage, as well as they have to come on a capacity charges. Now capacity charges is one thing which we have not given to these developers, so that is something which we would look at in the future days to come, because they would provide auxiliary services, be on reserve, like then the reliability factor for the overall VRE would go up along with storage. So when we are talking about RE plus storage or solar wind plus storage, so that is where there would be some amount of cost, but that cost can be optimized with the introduction of ancillary services with a capacity charge. So that is something which probably we would be looking at in the days to come in a big way. At the same time, as the entire demand definitely wouldn't come from a 25-year PPAs, because there is a limitation obviously on the amount of overall absorption that the discoms would be able to do moving forward, because obviously they would go as per the resource adequacy plans and the RPO targets. Now who would consume it in a big way would be the market, the power markets, which is just about 6 to 7% on a market mode where power needs to come, and also by the C&I consumers. So with the CBAM coming in, the C&I consumers, there is a huge demand for the products on green. So there is this demand projections that we see, and we are closely working now to bring in products like the CFD and the bilateral contract settlements. If you as you are aware, the VPPA, virtual power procurement agreement, power purchase agreements, draft guidelines have been issued by CERC very recently in terms of where the green attributes will flow. So that is of course in a draft stage, but that is one thing which I would look at as a important driver to ensure that the market mode of these operations, the RE markets, would take up in a big way. So with the CNI markets and the market mode going up, and um, the RPO obligations of the various discoms, as well as the RCO obligations of the designated consumers being enforced, I would see there is a way forward for VRE along with the storage and hybrid along with wind, and moving one or diversifying oneself not just from the discom related beds, which is the 25-year PPA, but into CNI and the market mode. So when we see to all these three things together along with ancillary charges, I see there is a huge capacity available in the market today, as well as that capacity which can be utilized. So I was reading the draft report that I think you are wanting to publish. So if public financial support for a capacity which is already there probably may not be the right approach. So here we should add more services like the ancillary services, the services on tertiary reserves and the primary secondary reserves. So these are things which I would see needs to be added in the days to come, where these FDRE would find more relevance to come, so that the spare capacity can also be utilized. So it's all about who uses what and at what cost. So I think if the risk is properly shared and the investment is diversified, I think there is a huge way forward for the FDRE bids also moving forward. But as on today, uh, the kind of differential that is there, the cost differential that is there, I'm sure that is only a matter of time that this would quickly come down, because this is also a factor of the ALMM costs. So now the approved list of model and manufacturing cell costs and also the module costs are coming down drastically in the country. So which means that the cost to the developer and cost of the entire project is going to go down. So from that standpoint also, the overall cost economics is going to improve. So I would just keep these points for consideration to be included into the report. And I would only end by saying that the grid decarbonization efforts in the country is happening in a big way. The rooftop solarization, the distributed renewable energy initiatives have been a major success. So the transmission challenges and the other AT&C losses aspect that is there are being largely resolved by the DREs and the rooftop solarization. Almost we are talking close to about 2 million households already connected to the rooftop solar in the country, and almost 1 million of farmers who are benefited out of the PM Kusum. Again, another fantastic DRE schemes. I think it is a time that we diversify our overall thinking in terms of mm, uh, only PPAs coming in with the discoms and with a 25-year stranglehold. So I think that is where we have a large space opening up, both for on the DRE side as well, and also on the way that this power is procured and power is operated in the market. So I would just leave it here to think about all these, to mull over this during the day's discussion, and then incorporate these suggestions also at an appropriate level into the report by ISD. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir, for those insightful observations and for clearly highlighting the policy direction that will guide India's next phase of clean energy deployment. Your reflections clearly give us a clear view of both the challenges as well as the possibilities ahead. And also, thank you so much for taking out time out of your busy schedule. We know that you were extremely busy with the ongoing parliament session, and yet you came here to share your perspectives on this very important subject. This really means a lot to us, sir. Thank you so much. Uh,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, with that rich context in place, we now turn to Dr. Anasuya Gangopadhyay from C-STEP to share the core findings from our report on FDRE that will then anchor today's discussion. Over to you, Anasuya, for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sunil. Yeah, because we have been discussing FDRE for some time now. So let me discuss the main key findings of the report along with the objectives. I am Anasuya Gangopadhyay, Senior Associate in C-STEP. And let's get to the objectives of this report. So as we can see here, we have tried to answer a few questions, main questions through this report, where the first we find out whether there is a cost gap really in between the farm and dispatchable renewable energy and coal-based electricity. And then if it is there, how to bridge that? It need not be financial always. It can be non-financial as well. So that's the another thing. And then finally, we investigate whether this investment, like the bridging the cost gap, will have impact in terms of macroeconomics, society, environment, and energy system. So that's the macroeconomics part of the analysis. And then finally, how government efforts can interact with technological cost reductions and private sector investment. The main focus of the study has been the strategic decision making at national level for FDRE, and then evidence based approach to design government support through scenario construction. Now, why we are talking about FDRE and why suddenly now? Uh, that's another thing. So, as we have been listening, that India is really doing great in terms of renewable energy. Like we have already have huge installed capacity of solar and wind, but also we must remember that they are all weather dependent sources. So in a electricity grid, we have to meet the demand and the supply, balance these two at every point in a day. However, this supply side, when it becomes weather dependent, the job becomes extremely difficult, and maintaining stability in the grid becomes extremely challenging. There are several tools, like Sunil also said in the beginning, to manage these challenges. Uh, FDRE is one such tool which hybridizes solar, wind, and battery storage together, so that round the clock supply can be maintained, given demand profiles can be met, and that's what is one of the solution. The next coming to the main paradigm shift here. So what has happened in the recent future is there has been a paradigm shift from generation based renewable energy. It has moved to demand based clean power solutions, like our keynote speakers and special address speakers were highlighting. So that brings us to FDRE and why we did work on FDRE this time in this study. Getting to the research design and output, we have taken quantitative as well as qualitative approaches. So, in terms of quantitative approach, we have done cost modeling, so levelized cost comparison of FDRE. We did it based on our earlier report as well as this report. We estimated the LCOE of FDRE and tried to compare it with the new pithead coal plants. And then we also did market participation scenarios, because as it was pointed out that to mitigate all the risk, to meet the demand profile at all point of the day, the developers need to have a quantity of additional capacity which is beyond what is required. So this extra capacity will generate surplus generation which is beyond the committed FDRE generation value. Now, how to sell it? We can sell it in the market or have some arrangement to sell it, but that's a question mark. Basically, that's very uncertain. So that's another part which we have incorporated in our analysis. When we show you the result, we'll come to that. Now, coming to the qualitative interviews. So these were semi-structured interviews. Who we approached? We approached SECI, we approached government officials and experts from different national think tanks. And what we asked mainly about the bankability, risk, then of course the tender design, like how stringent should be the requirement to be meeting the demand profile. So that was one of the discussion point. And then revenue stacking. This revenue stacking came again and again in our earlier discussions. As you have noticed, the ancillary service market and the capacity market values, whether the storage which is already included in the FDRE can be used for this ancillary market. Can they participate in that? So that was another point. Then, of course, we talked about whether FDRE and standalone storage should be compared with each other and how we used it, the findings. So to have the discussion was great, and then our assumptions were validated through these discussions. We showed them our preliminary results, got feedback from them. Then, of course, the global experience also was shared with us, which also definitely helped us to design the capacity ancillary market related text in our report. The key output which came out of this analysis is mainly to do with the cost parity, like when FDRE will reach cost parity at with the new pithead coal at what point of time, and what would be the cost gap estimation, and if we have a cost gap and we decide to bridge the gap, what would be the macroeconomic benefit. So these were the two key outputs. This is our key findings. So in a very short and brief way, you can have a look at our report to have details. Let me take you through the findings here. So here we have the LCOE estimations of FDRE, effective LCOE basically, when in one situation, the yellow line says when 30% of the surplus, remember I had mentioned in the earlier slide that they will have certain amount of surplus. So one scenario we created where only 30% surplus could be sold. This is not a very optimistic scenario. It's a very pessimistic scenario indeed. And then we have a very optimistic scenario where we assume that 100% of the surplus was sold. But more realistic and a moderate scenario is this red line where we assume that 50% of surplus was sold. Now coming to the benchmark, this dotted line shows us the benchmark of electricity price from coal, new peathead coal plant, LCOE, and that is 4.65. We have assumed it to be constant. Of course, it can also vary, but in the study, to keep it simple, we have kept it constant. And then we saw that in case of 100% surplus sold, which is optimistic scenario, FDRE is already very competitive with the benchmark, which is new peathead. And these are different tenders, which shows that our findings are in the ballpark, in the range, which was also mentioned by earlier keynote speakers. So this is also shown here. And coming to this red line, which is more realistic, we see a crossover in 2030. So this means by 2030, the FDRE is expected to match the price of coal power here, given by the dotted line. So this is one of the great findings. However, it is important to note that this coal benchmark price does not include any social cost of thermal power plant. In reality, if we consider these externalities, the full social cost of thermal power plants, FDRE would be much cheaper. So what is the way forward? Once we have the cost gap, we decided to see what are the measures which can help us. One of the way which came out is develop and deepen the wholesale electricity market so that more and more of excess electricity generated, which is surplus, can be sold. So that's one of the great findings here. And coming to the other part, this plot shows us the cost gap analysis, where this red line, again corresponding to 50% surplus sold, shows us that there's a crossover in 2030 and beyond which there's no cost gap. And if we look at this right side plot here, we can see that if we try to bridge the short-term cost gap here, where my mouse is, and that's a short-term cost, will eventually have a huge long-term benefit in terms of development, job, lower pollution. So these are macroeconomic benefits. This is a main finding from the report. And then you see that the crossover corresponds with this peak. And after that, because the benefit takes over, slowly the cumulative cost gap comes down. And finally, we have only benefits, the macroeconomic benefits here. Here is the report. You can scan this QR code and go to the report directly. It's already available online. And this is the link which is given below. And please feel free to contact us, me and Sunil, for any further queries. And if you have any queries right now, please write in the Q&A box. We will try to take it up during panel discussion, or if not possible for the time constraint, we'll definitely get back to you over email. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Anasia. I'm going to be moderating our panel discussion today, and we've got about 20 minutes, which is a little bit less than we'd originally planned, but we've had such an interesting discussion. I think we haven't lost anything in that. But what I will do is try and move things a little bit faster by just introducing each panelist as I turn to them and ask a question. And I would ask that each panelist maybe just provide a 3-5-minute response, and then we'll turn to the next panelist. And then if there's time left over, we can ask more questions and delve into further issues. So first of all, I would like to turn to Mr. Pratik Agarwal, Program Lead for the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Pratik, you raised some really excellent points in your review of our report, including that FDRE could unintentionally lock the system into oversizing surplus generation and rigid contractual obligations at a time when India is trying to move towards more flexible market responsive power procurement. So, from a market design and system efficiency perspective, how do you think India should think about the role of FDRE?
Right. Thank you so much, Tara. Am I audible? I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much, Tara, and glad to be part of this discussion. I'll focus on, I think, two things, I think, which is again the focus of the today's session is how sort of India should think about FDREs in their evolving market space. And second, I think what alternate procurement strategies we should consider so that again, we are able to meet the larger objective of reliable and flexible clean power. So on your point on how we should think about FDREs, I think FDREs has been really helpful in a way that it signals that India wants clean power that can be delivered on demand. I think that's a positive shift. And again, I think the initial keynote also pointed out that it pushed the market to think beyond a plain vanilla RE type of contracts, and the developers have been able to integrate storage while delivering FDRE type constructs. But I think as of today, if we look at FDRE, still primarily it is a contract optimization instrument, and it's not a system optimization instrument where developers they sort of try to optimize and meet the round the clock requirements, which often means that they'll oversize solar wind, they'll generate surplus that sometimes might get curtailed, and it would also mean sometimes that they lock capacity into fixed dispatch rather than any price responsive behaviors. So, in a nutshell, sort of it's a contract optimization that we are achieving right now, but we need to eventually move towards system optimization. And another important point to note here is that the FDRE contracts today, or again, the construct that they are built upon is that they look at the sort of historical demand patterns, basis that some future demand patterns, and this is how these constructs or these contracts are being designed. But I think India is evolving, or we have sort of states where nuances are very different. The future demand pattern might look very different. So we'll have to see how these FDRE contracts are able to deliver the value or the needs of the system maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line. That's where I think the developers will face some sort of challenges in getting the returns for the money that they've put in. That's a major sort of problem here because these contracts are designed based on demand patterns of today or some future projections, but we don't know what the future demand projections would look like, the patterns would look like. So yeah, I think we should definitely see FDRE as one useful pathway. But again, it's not the end journey in itself. It's not the end state. It's a phase in the larger scheme of things. And I think lastly, I would say that yes, we need to see that the contracts which India need to sign, they should evolve from these now clock hours based contracts to more system value hours, which again means that like a share of our revenue or the way the contracts or the tariffs are designed, they should eventually sort of align with whatever the peak demand is. They should speak to the ramping requirements of the grid stress, and all the real time prices. Yeah, I think FDRE, I think, has been successful in delivering the firm power. That is what we need today. But tomorrow, sort of, we need flexibility, and that's what we should build the system for look like. I'll stop here to see if there are any follow-ups on this. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great response. I might just, rather than provide a follow-up on that, I might just move on and then we'll come back if we've got more time. So the next panelist I'd like to introduce is Mr. Pratik Prasun, who's the Deputy General Manager, Contracts and Procurement of the Solar Energy Corporation of India Limited. Pratik, SECI pioneered India's first FDRE tenders, and the initial bids generated a lot of discussion about surplus management, sizing, and bankability. From SECI's perspective so far, what are the structural lessons that are emerging from FDRE tenders?
Morning, everyone. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this discussion. Yeah, as rightly pointed out, when we started with this FDRE concept, we were also in the learning stage. And over the past 3 years, what I can summarize so far is that there are 2-3 major aspects which we have to address. First is monetization of the excess supply. The first tender which we have discovered, that was actually a demand following tender, so that failed to take off. But there, the bidders, what we gather is that the bidders were unable to, put a price on the excess power which they would be able to sell in the market. So that's why they loaded in the tariff, and that resulted in a substantially higher tariff than what we had expected. So, for any future tenders, similar tender, what we would like to design, we would first of all we would want to get that excess supply monetization part being addressed. If that is addressed by the procurer, or if there is something, if the market also deepens, then that presents an opportunity for them to monetize it. So that is an outcome of basically oversizing of the projects. Now, oversizing depends on the nature of profile. So there, what we have learned is that not the one size fits all policy probably doesn't fit all the tenders. So a certain level of flexibility is also expected from such tenders. For example, let's say even if it's a solar plus 4 hour storage, there might be durations wherein you don't need solar, but then because of the must-run nature, they have to inject solar because they have to design the system to supply the peak requirement. So that is something which discoms keep on discussing with us. The next part is the 25-year term. That is more to do with the procurer rather than the generator, because uh, for a procurer entering into a tariff relatively which they are not paying, they have not been paying so far for RE at a higher price. So locking with the same profile and the same tariff for a 25-year period, when the discounts are even themselves not sure of what their profile would be, demand profile would be, let's say 10 years down the line. So there are talks of entering into smaller term PPAs. But as a generator, they would want to have that balance between returns and the timeline, so that we have to find that sweet spot wherein it becomes agreeable to both the parties. So in that respect, the RENCL recent RTC tender which we had discovered, I think it was a good tariff which we discovered. There they had a concept of lower FDR, lower demand requirement in the initial years, and then taking the demand curve higher at a more accurate level. So that level of flexibility is something. So that commensurates with the falling battery prices also, or storage prices. So let's say when the demand requirement is actually meeting a higher level of firmness, then you have the capacity ready to meet that requirement without without much addition to the costs. So then they probably would be in a better position to give a better tariff rather. So these are some of the learnings we can discuss later. In detail if we have time.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting. I don't think we considered in our report the idea of a changing
Right.
composition of BESS battery storage over time within one FDRE contract. So that's a fascinating idea. As you say, it's taking that idea that there are learning curves and cheaper storage coming online over the lifetime of a 25-year contract. So that's an excellent point. My next panelist I'd like to introduce is Mr. Alexander Hogveen-Rutte. He's a manager of research and diligence from Third Directive. Now, Alex, sorry, just skimming to my questions here. In global markets, some regions used hybrid renewable energy and storage products as transitional tools, while others quickly shifted to standalone storage deployed where it's delivered the most system value. So what determines whether hybrid models like FDRE remain relevant, or whether systems transition towards standalone storage and flexible dispatch models?
Yeah, I think actually Alok Kumar, sir, and Mr. Subramaniam touched on this, a lot of things like CFDs. So for example, in Canada, where I'm from, we wouldn't have firm contracts. We would be bidding into the market. We would just be selling to the market. But obviously, you don't want to be building 25-year assets and taking all the CapEx and taking all that risk. So we would manage that by having a CFD, which kind of would replicate a PPA and would address some of the concerns Prateek mentioned in terms of the long term versus short term. Things like ancillary services, things like capacity payments. Obviously India lacks a capacity mechanism. Anybody who knows me, least cost resource adequacy planning, it's kind of a very fundamental bedrock. Ideally, the discoms are sophisticated enough that they can say, here is my demand, here are the mix of resources I need to meet that load. So I'm going to need this much storage, I'm going to need this much solar, I'm going to need this much wind to meet my load. I think what's useful about FDRE, especially right now in the Indian context, is that quite frankly, the discoms are not that sophisticated. Almost no discoms in India do least cost resource adequacy planning. We don't have capacity markets. We don't have CFDs yet. We don't have primary ancillary services market. We don't have reserves. So in the meantime, FDREs are a fantastic tool to say, here is the cost of FDRE. It is directly comparable to the cost of a thermal plant. For a regulator, that really, really simplifies things for them, rather than saying, okay, here's a storage contract, and here's a wind contract, and here's a solar contract, and here's a PSP contract, and all together, trust me, this is equivalent to a coal plant. They can say, here's a contract where it has an availability of 90% or whatever it is. That is comparable. So I think in some sense, India is actually quite unique. The only other real jurisdiction that's done something like FDRE is South Africa, which has very similar challenges to India. But I think it's a good intermediate step on the way to getting to full market systems and getting to market competition. But I see certainly in the medium term, we're still going to need FDRE structures as these market structures continue to evolve.
Thank you. And given you gave a very concise answer, I'd just like to follow up on contracts for difference. Do you see them as something that's likely to be employed in India in the sort of foreseeable future? Or I understand there were some legal restraints that have now been removed around CFDs. Have you been hearing that they're likely to become?
Yeah, there already are CFD type structures for the short to medium term. I think just using it for the long term to kind of to use them for 10 plus years, that is not fully fleshed out. There's been jurisdictional disputes between kind of RBI and the regulator and CRC in terms of who gets to manage them and regulate them. But in some sense, you could already go to IEX and do a CFD type structure today. So we're getting there. I think a lot of it is actually just making the discoms comfortable with it. Seki, I'll let Pratik speak more if he wants to about kind of the CFD structure they've done for storage. NDPC recently did one with Engie. So I think we're seeing it. We just need to see much more of it.
Yeah, great. Good to know. Thank you. So our fourth panelist, who I'd like to introduce now, is Mr. Demalya Sen, President of the India Energy Storage Alliance. So India's short-term markets, balancing reserves, and ancillary service frameworks are still evolving, and this directly influences the economics of storage and whether paired or standalone storage is viable or most economic. From an industry's perspective, how should India balance FDRE-linked storage and standalone BESS deployments? What factors, such as siting flexibility, transmission availability, and revenue stacking potential, determine where storage can deliver the highest system value?
Hi, thank you. I'm audible? Great, okay. So FDRE, I think much has been talked about it. Now, what we have seen is that the tariffs of these FDREs are in the range of, as was said, 4.2 to 4.2 to 4.9 rupees per kilowatt hour. So what happened was when these FDREs were launched, if we look into the trajectory, 23 and 24 had been the main years when we saw a plethora of FDREs coming out, but 25 kind of has been muted in the response category. So now, if you look into that, if I put on my Discom hat and I talk about from the Discom perspective, they say that okay, I don't want an FDRE and I don't want to pay 4 rupees to you throughout the year, even at night when my APPC is much lower. And that is where they are finding solar plus storage much more economical or much more palatable as an offering. And thus, they are moving to solar plus storage. And if you look into FDRE 1 category, that is only dispatchable during peak hours, that has found traction and that has found price discoveries of 6.7 rupees per kilowatt hour. Now, whether you want that or you want that or you want FDRE of 4 rupees to supply you power throughout the day is the question. Which one do you want? Do you want RTC or do you want peak power, which is your main pain point? That is the question. Okay, now RTC will of course come at a premium, but then we are seeing these other products which are much more palatable. Now, if you look into the last RTC bid, okay, out of 1200 megawatt that was tendered, only 420 megawatt was approved, okay, or awarded. But if you look into the other one, that is the FDRE peak supply, if you look into that tender, SJVN's tender had kind of it was oversubscribed by 2.1 times. Okay, so you see that is finding traction, whereas RTC is not finding traction, and that has been true also beyond awarding of this tender. You need to find a buyer. Now, Seki has been on the pain point, so Seki will tell you better that signing of contracts is a pain, but then the bigger pain is after signing the end consumer moving away. So that is a bigger pain. So I think we have to decide on what is the necessity and then accordingly design.
I think that's exactly right. And that's a similar conclusion to what we found in the report, is that FDRE has its place in the system, but it is not, it's a more expensive option. And in many cases, standalone storage or solar plus storage is going to be a better option. Yeah. We just have sort of a few minutes left, actually maybe about 2 minutes before I hand over to Shruti. So I just wanted to ask maybe anyone on the panel that would like to respond. I'm from Australia. We have a capacity investment scheme that essentially provides a contract for difference type model for storage, and it might be 4 hours storage or 8 hours storage. And this essentially is providing the market operator with storage when it needs it. With a model like this potentially work in India as well as an alternative to the current models that are being used?
Yeah, I think this would work, but I think, you mentioned solar plus storage is a better option. I think solar plus storage alone is a cheaper option. The better option is firm, reliable power. So if we do move to capacity markets, if we do move to this sort of structure that we have in Australia, we're going to need the discoms, we're going to need the states to do basically synthetic FDRE, right? They're going to have to plan to have, I need this much wind, I need this much solar to charge that storage, to make sure I have enough energy in addition to my capacity, right? So I don't think FDRE would go away. I think it would just be, in some sense, replaced by discoms building their own FDRE portfolios. And if they do it separately, if they have their own storage and their own wind and their own solar, then they just have that more flexibility to dispatch the storage as they need it, as opposed to the classical FDRE contracts, which have much lesser flexibility.
Yeah, exactly. I shouldn't have used the word better. It was maybe cheaper was the words I was looking for. So now, thank you very much, panelists. I'm sorry we had a little bit less time than expected, but I really appreciate all your input, and thank you so much for joining and for your insights, not only during this presentation, but also throughout this project as we developed our methodology and as we developed the report. We really appreciate your inputs. And now I'll turn to Shruti for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Dara. Hi everyone, I'm Shruti Sharma. I lead the country program for ISD's energy team in India, and I also look at ISD's work on affordable energy. I just want to begin by sincerely thanking all our panelists for making the time to join us in what I know is a very busy month for all of us. So I'd also like to especially thank our keynote speakers, Mr. JVN Subramaniam and Mr. Alok Kumar, and especially Mr. Kumar, because he's very engaged and very constructive comments that he's given us while reviewing the study. So for me, I think the standout point from today's discussion was the need for a continuous conversation on the cost competitiveness of 24/7 reliable electricity and ongoing future reforms that are needed for accelerating how fast and how fairly India moves towards 24/7 RE. balancing both reliability, affordability, and decarbonization. Before we close, I would really encourage you to continue the conversation with us, share your views on FDRE, respond to the findings, and continue the discussion, whether through social media or through ISD's channels, or by reaching out directly to the authors and our team. Thanks again for your time, your insights, and your support. And we look forward to this collaboration. Have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.